we have been talking about having deeper faith and all that that means. And that song we just sang, Trust and Obey, it applies directly to what we're going to look at today as it relates to trust. Because very often, when we think about faith, we've been kind of making sure that we, understand and really drive home the point that having faith is more than just understanding that God exists and that He's there. But how do we apply that in a practical way? How do we actually live out our faith? How does our faith grow and develop to where we can really demonstrate through our lives, not only for other people to be able to see Christ in us, but also demonstrate for God the type of faith that we actually have in Him? And that word trust will come up quite a bit today as we look a little deeper into faith. It's interesting because when we, and in that song, trust and obey, what he says we will do, where we will go, we think about what it means to actually have faith. And, we really can't live out a life that has real faith in God if we're not willing to, in fact, trust Him and obey Him. But what does that look like? What exactly does that look like for each one of us? We know this in theory. We understand who God is. We can understand this conceptually, but it sometimes takes on something totally different when you actually have to go out there and deal with life. When you experience challenging and tough things in life. And so we want to look at that today. The title of the lesson I've given it is The Other Side of Faith. The other side of faith. Because sometimes, on the front end, faith sounds like something that we're all willing to do and we're willing to embrace until we are confronted with life. Until we're confronted with things that's a real challenge. That's when our faith is really tested. And I want to look at a couple of examples of that today. It's interesting, this idea, this concept of trust. What does it mean to really trust God? Because there are times when we trust God with certain things, because in our mind it's like, well, I know God can handle that, and I know that's what He says in His Word that He's going to do. But then there's other things that come up, and it's like, I don't know. I'm a little less certain, And when we think about trust, everybody in here right now is engaged in a certain level of trust, right? Because everybody walked in here, and I doubt anybody really thought much about it. Most of us have been here before, so you came in, and no matter where you are, if you're looking at me, I'm looking at everybody. I'm the only one standing. Everybody came in and did this. Everybody came in and sat down. I remember someone asked me, they were explaining the idea of trust to me, and trust is basically, I trust that this chair can handle my weight. Anybody who's ever sat in the chair and the chair broke? Okay, so you understand, right? Like I think I've told this story before. I remember my son, up until he was almost 2. Well, actually he was 2. He was almost 3. My son, honestly, he doesn't know this yet. He really thought that I was infallible. Like I was capable of doing anything. He thought I was Superman until the one day that I fell while I was holding him, fell down the steps, and we both landed in the snow. He hasn't felt quite so certain ever since then, right? Because suddenly it's like, wait a minute, I don't feel too confident in this, right? But think about it, we go through this all the time. We trust certain things every day. We trust that we're going to go to the faucet and turn it on, and there's water that's going to come out. Unless you didn't pay your bill or there's a problem and they cut it off or something. The fact is, there's certain things we just trust. We call it by their names, like assumptions. There are things about the universe that's been set up. There's things about our world. None of us are afraid, even as we're sitting here. None of us are afraid that we're going to go floating away. Because we trust that gravity is going to maintain us. Some of us have a little more gravity than others. And so we're less concerned about floating away. But the fact is, we trust that gravity is going to keep us on the ground. Nobody's thinking, he needs to hurry up. I hope he doesn't float away, right? And, you know, I think about this because I see this from time to time. The older you get, and I'm kind of getting to that place where there were things I used to be able to be fully confident and trust that, you know what, I'm going to just get up and I can just go. And now it's like, I kind of got to think about it a little bit. You know, let me make sure. I'm not quite as certain. Suddenly, getting up and sitting down doesn't feel quite the same. Anybody who's gotten to that point where they got knee problems or hip problems, you understand that. You don't just take it for granted. You don't just trust it. Well, I'm going to sit down here, but I'm just going to get right back up. Sometimes you got to think about it, you know. And, you know, this, guilty as charged. I've done this before, where it's like, I trust a little bit too much in my own balance. I'm a little too confident and self-assured, and I'll do something where it's like, that actually isn't what it was intended for, but I'm too lazy or too tired or it's too cold or it's raining. I don't want to go outside and get the ladder, so I'm going to stand on a chair with wheels on the bottom to reach up, and everybody sees that. Some of you nodding your head, Kay's like, that was a bad thought from the beginning. Yeah, well, yeah, but I trust that this chair can hold my weight. Yeah, but not like that. That was never how that chair was intended. And when we think about our faith and how we trust God, sometimes, you know, we talked about it, how it's like believing in God and believing that God is there for us is not just a matter of, okay, I'm just going to wake up and I'm just going to rub this, you know, magic lamp and God's going to pop out and bless me. No, that's actually not how it works. But it's important for us to understand how faith works, because sometimes we look at faith and we're like, why isn't faith working for me? Why? I believe in God, this all-powerful God. He's created the universe. He specifically knows every hair on my head. I believe in what the word says. But why isn't faith working for me? Some of us are standing on faith when we should be sitting. Some of us need to get a ladder, but we're just like, I want to cut some corners here. I'm in a hurry. So I'm going to stand. Like, we look at this guy. Look how ridiculous he looks. I've lived this more than you would think. After the first time I fell off of a rolling chair, I wouldn't do it again. But no, because sometimes we're hard-headed. And we know we're doing faith wrong, but we still keep doing it. Why? Well, we have different reasons. I have mine. You know, some of you think I've never gotten on a chair with wheels on it and stood on it with 2 feet. I'm a little bit older now. And I want to stand here before you and say, I'm probably never going to do this again. But I have to put probably up there because sometimes faith is hard. It's hard for us to really embrace the fact that we have to do it right. We can't be mad at God when somehow we don't seem to understand and see faith in our life, when the fact of the matter is you're not doing it right because you're not really trusting Him. We sing the song, Trust and Obey, but we're not really trusting and obeying Him. And then we wonder why faith isn't working in our life. It doesn't seem to be having the impact. Are we actually doing faith right? And I want to look at a couple examples of that today. But before I do that, I need a couple of volunteers. Okay, you, sir. I need another one. Anybody? I don't have to pick anybody. Come on, Andrew. Yes. All right, we'll get some of the younger men. They don't know what's coming. I started to ask people before service, and I said no. I'm going to wait. I wanted to all be a surprise to everybody. So, do you trust that I am strong enough to pick you up? He's thinking about it, right? You, sir, do you trust that I'm strong enough to pick you up? You're okay. I'm okay. Okay, that wasn't like a resounding like, yeah, no, okay. Now, let's, and many of us, we've done this demonstration before. Do you believe, stand here, face that way. Do you believe that if you fall back that I can catch you? Are you confident that I can catch you? All right, don't lean yet. Now, the thing is, you believe that I can. Do you trust that I will? All right? He's seen me. He knows he's looked at me. He's evaluated me. Okay, he can't. Do you trust that if you fall back, that I will, in fact, stand back here and catch you? You think I will pull all my effort into it, but you have some doubt. Now, where does that doubt come from?
From falling.
That's the correct answer. Because he's fallen before. So his past falls, his past examples in his life of falling, he's like, I'm not going to fall on the back of my head. I don't know that I want to take that chance. Even if he needs to. Now imagine if you were in a burning building, right? And I'm, firefighters out there with trampoline. It's like, jump. See, suddenly it's a little bit different because, it's a fire, it's an emergency. You don't have time to think. But would you trust, or would it be, okay, I'm going to do this because maybe I don't have any other options? Now, before we go any further with that, come over here, Andrew. Now watch how this works. Turn around, same thing. Now first, look at us. Andrew and I are going to hold our hands together. Okay. Now, turn around. Do you trust that Andrew and I can hold you?
Yes.
Do you believe that we will?
Yes.
A little less hesitancy in that. Because suddenly he sees the strength that there are two men. You can go sit down. I'm not going to make it. We're not going to do that here. There's actually a camera rolling. We don't need this to go viral. It'll be on YouTube. The thing is, when you see two men there, suddenly it takes on a totally different complexion. Now, in life, what we're doing when we say we have faith in God, we're saying God is clearly bigger and stronger and more capable and more loving than Andrew and I together, combined, exponentially, however you want to put it together. But when it comes to being willing to obey and follow his instructions in faith, where does our doubt actually come from? And David said it perfectly. It comes from our past falls. It comes from mistakes. It comes from problems. It comes from disappointments and hurts. And so what God is really asking us to engage in when we're going to engage in a walk of faith with him is he's really saying, do you trust me when I tell you to do this, even if you don't know what's on the other side, even if you don't know how everything is going to transpire? I want to start by looking at an example in John chapter 11. Many of us know this passage. We've read this. This is a story about two sisters and this man named Lazarus who died. And we won't go through all of it, but just a quick recap. They send word to Jesus and tell him, hey, Lazarus is sick. And you know, this is your friend. This is your buddy. You care about him. He is sick. He needs your healing power. He needs you to touch him. He needs you to come heal him. And Jesus says, okay. But Jesus doesn't, jump on the first, express bus there. He's walking and he's taking his time. Ultimately, it takes him 4 days to get there. Mary and Martha both, they're disappointed. They're sad. Their response was, I heard what you said, because in the very beginning of this, he tells them, this will not end in death. Lazarus is not going to die. Even his disciples were kind of, they were kind of confused, and they were like, kind of rationally trying to figure it out. Thomas was like, oh, well, let's go so we can die with him. Like, they didn't really understand Jesus meant what he said. Lazarus is not going to die. But they see that he's not breathing anymore. They put his wrappings, his burial, they dress him, and they put him inside the grave, his tomb. They put the rock over it. And Jesus shows up, and their response was, if you had just gotten here on time, if you had just showed up sooner, we asked you about this Jesus days ago. If you had just gotten here in time, you could have fixed it. We believe that you could have fixed it. We believe that you could have kept him from dying. And so we'll pick up the story here because Jesus did this particular part of the story, starting in verse 38, is where I want to really draw our attention to. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, "the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Anybody who understands it, it doesn't have to be a human, it can be an animal. You know how it is, you're driving down the road and you're like, ooh, there's a deer or a fox or a bear or a dog, something is dead. And after so many days, it begins to smell. Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." There's a few pieces I want us to really take in here. Understand, right before we pick up in verse 38 there, in verse 35, I believe, it's the shortest passage in the whole Bible. Jesus wept. And then we pick up in 38, it says, "Once again moved with compassion." See, Jesus cared. He understood the sorrow. He could feel and embrace that. But he understood that God had to do something that was beyond just how he felt. They needed to see this for their own faith. They needed to see. Not only did they need to see it, but let's kind of zoom in on this just a little bit and focus. When it says that they responded with, "He had a bad odor. It's been 4 days." That wasn't just them saying, "Well, you know what? I don't want to do it." It was, "I have very good reason why I don't want to do this. This doesn't even make sense." Kind of like, falling. There are rules to this. There's gravity. There are things such as decay. That's not just them making up an excuse to not go remove the stone. That actually exists. We've seen it. That's how the world works. And he's saying, I need you to see something different. I need you to see God in a much different way than you've understood him. Very often we see God and we understand God on a very clinical, very academic level. We forget that our walk of faith is not just duty and following rules. It's a supernatural experience. He does it because he's saying, I need you to understand that the God that you serve, what I'm directing you to, is something beyond the physical, something beyond science, something beyond biology. He needed to be in that grave for 4 days. He needed that to be, that way there'd be no doubt. There'd be no confusion. Nobody can say, well, maybe he just, passed out, or maybe he was just faint. Maybe it was a coma. No, he needed to actually be wrapped up in a cloth and dead and in a tomb. So there would be no doubt that the God that he is calling them to serve is a God of the supernatural. He is a God that is not bound by all these laws and things that we have come to understand, rule and dictate. We serve a God who's supernatural, but it starts with a command. It ends with one as well here, but it starts with a command. He says, remove the stone. Very often when it comes to faith, God is saying to us, go remove the stone so that this dead thing, I can bring it back to life. But in our mind and everything we've ever learned in all of our life, it tells us that this thing can't be possible. It is dead. It can't be revived. Not only can it not be revived, and I saw it die, but it has a bad odor. It's been laying there for a long time. God saying, didn't I tell you that I'm not limited by these things? Didn't I tell you what you were going to see if you had faith in me? Our faith often has to start with us being willing to be obedient and trust Him and just go move the stone. Our faith is often found on the other side of logic and reasoning and obedience. You know, another little important thing I want to point out here. Notice that when He says go remove the stone, He didn't just like pick out a person and say, hey, you go remove that stone. It took a lot of people. This wasn't just like picking up a rock. No, this was a stone that was put in front of this cave. A bunch of people had to go up and move this gigantic, like probably over a ton is what it weighed. They had to go roll this stone, drag this stone out of the way. Very often when it comes to faith, we have to be willing to help each other in our faith. And it's not just you have to go remove that stone. We have to help one another to remove that stone. That's a part of obedience. It's not just something we do. That's what the church is for. But it starts with us being willing to understand that while this may not seem logical, this may not make sense according to the laws of physics and biology and chemistry and gravity and all those things that we've grown to accept, God's like, I'm above this. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we actually believe? Do we place our faith in a God who is above these things? You know, I talked about that whole spiritual walk, that idea that God is not just about the tangible things that exist in our lives, but very often we resist, and sometimes we fail to look at the fact that we come together to encourage one another and pray for one another and build one another up. But what are we actually building one another up to? Are we just trying to have nice, good, clean, tidy lives? Or are we trying, in chasing after God, are we trying to chase after Him because we know that it is beyond just the physical? It's beyond just the things that we can know and see for ourselves and the things that we've learned, but that is actually a supernatural experience. You know, I like this because, you know, it talks about healing. This word cloud, you know, kindness, purpose, to forgive. Very often what God is saying is, I want you to be obedient to me and trust me and do what my word says, even though that's not going to make sense, even though it doesn't seem like the end result and the outcome is going to be what you would expect. I need you to trust me. I need you to carry out and follow through on my instructions. Because only when you do will you see the power of God working. We want to intellectualize. We want to, you know, look at it from an academic standpoint. We want to make sense of everything, understanding that it won't make sense. Our faith in God is not entirely based on all things are going to make sense. There are certain things we will never be able to understand. We don't necessarily know why, the reasons, but we can't know. It's not that, you know, God doesn't want to show us. He's like, I can't explain it to you. As Mary and Martha are sitting there crying, saying, God, if you had just shown up, Lazarus wouldn't be dead. Very often, God is looking at us, and, you know, fast forward a couple thousand years, He's saying, you know, we look at God and we say, God, my broken relationship with my parents, it would not have died had you shown up. My marriage, if you had just shown up, it would not have failed the way that it did. I wouldn't have lost that job had you just shown up. And God is looking back at us saying, Do you trust me? Do you understand I had a purpose and why I allowed this thing to die, this thing to fail? It's just like David said, hey, I know what it's like to fall. I know what it's like to hurt and feel pain. And we see the way human beings fail us and hurt us. We see life's experiences. And then we hold that against God. And in reality, yes, I know that God has created the entire universe and all these things. I understand this spiritual thing and all the galaxies and all the universe. We understand conceptually, intellectually, who this God is. We even believe it. But we don't trust him enough to be obedient and follow what he says. You know, this quote says, I wonder what history will record about my city and yours, and about each of us, and the level of our faith in spiritual awakening. What we really need to be deeper and stronger in our faith is not necessarily just more reading and more knowledge. Very often what we need is to trust in the spiritual. Do we actually trust and believe that this God that we believe, this God that we serve, that it's a spiritual walk? Because sometimes in the physical and in the natural, it will not make sense. I want to look at one more example of this in Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 1. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got in one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything, but because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, Go away from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. Here we see another example of something that doesn't make sense. But not only that, let's put this in context again here. Simon, James, and John, they're not just people who he's saying, hey, go out and do this again, follow my instructions, but they're experts in this. These aren't just, me and, me and Steve go out fishing or something, and Jimmy, and we're trying to, reel in the cat. These are professional fishermen. This is what they do. They know what time to go out. They know what to expect, different time, different seasons. They are professional fishermen and they're surviving, so clearly they're good enough to know and understand how fish work. They've been taught, they've been trained. This is something that they do. This is in their wheelhouse, as we might call it. And Jesus comes and says, I know you're an expert on this thing. I know you know it better than everybody else, but I'm telling you to go back out. I'm telling you to do this one more time. Simon expresses this doubt, this uncertainty. He tells him, you know what? We've been out here all day and night. We haven't caught anything. We're the experts. But because you say so. When it comes to faith, very often, again, it's not just that we don't understand, but sometimes God's going to say, I know you know this situation better than me. You think. I know you are very adept and you've done the research, and so you think you know. But what we find here, the same thing we found in the passage we read about Lazarus, very often we approach God with our intellect and our knowledge and our findings, our expertise. We approach him and say, God, but this only makes sense. Past historic data tells me that this is what's working. Jesus isn't just walking around here saying, you know what, I'm just going to, flex my muscles and start, doing miracles and trying to show off. He's doing these things for a purpose, and the purpose is always to increase our faith. Faith in God is by definition the belief in God's supernatural power over the rules of this world. We believe that God is capable of doing things that no man can do. Otherwise, why would we just worship another man? Because we know that, other men, they live and they die and they bleed and they have health issues and they need food and things. They need the same things that we need. And in that way, we are all equal as men. God is not equal to us. He is above us. Do we actually believe that? Is that the type of faith that we walk in? I want my son or my daughter to find a relationship with God. Do we approach that from the standpoint of, well, we've been trying for years, I've been praying for them for years, I've been trying to get them to come to church for years, or I've been studying the Bible, I've been doing this for years. This broken relationship I had, this situation, that was years ago, to the point I've walked away from it, I've given up on it. Yeah, I believe, God, you could have fixed it if you had shown up in 2003. I believe that you could have fixed it if you had shown up back in 1987. I'm confident you could have done something about it then. But there's certainly nothing you can do about it now. And God is literally saying, not so. He's saying, no, actually not so. There's far more, not only that I can do, but I want to do. But do you even trust that I have the compassion and concern that I want to do it? But more to the point, do you believe that I actually can? Are you willing to suspend? Because that's our faith walk. I am willing to suspend my intelligence and my knowledge and my belief in what is right in front of me and say, I'm going to give this to you, God, because I know that you are above all that I know to be true. That the laws of physics and gravity and science, they don't apply to you. Do we actually believe that? Because that's the question we have to ask. If we're really going to have faith, because just like I asked in the very beginning, it's not just a matter of does DJ believe that if he falls back, I can catch him. Just like you came and you sat in this chair, you might know, okay, well, these chairs are designed, I don't know who the manufacturer is. I believe that they were designed to hold up my body weight, but that's not the same as sitting down. It's one thing if I say, do you believe that we can catch you? It's another thing for me to say, okay, now I need you to fall back. And then you do it. Even if you're concerned, even if you're afraid, even if it doesn't feel like something you should do, I'm going to trust that what God is telling me to do in his word, he's telling me I need to obey. He's telling me I need to follow through on this. He's telling me that no matter what, my eyes are telling me that he is sovereign, that he is Lord. Do we follow in faith with the understanding that God is not limited? Because if we say we believe that he created the universe and the world and everything that we have and we live, and he is in charge and controls everything, it's one thing to believe it, it's another thing to live like it when he says remove the stone. What stone is it that you have to remove? What stone is it that you need to go to the church and say, hey, you know what? Help me push this stone out the way. I need to be obedient and do what God asked me to do, even though it seems like it's useless. Even though people say, why would she do such a thing? Why would he do such a thing? It's going to smell by now. It's been there. Is that the God that you believe in? Is that the life and the walk of faith that you're carrying out? Do we believe in the supernatural power of God? A few questions I'll close with. Number one, do I trust the promise of God over science? Are his plans for me a matter of faith or human circumstance? You think about human circumstance. Very often, we like to put God kind of in a corner. You kind of want to put him in this section. You know, and we're like, well, I know God can do this, and I know he's powerful. Perfect response, kind of like he said, oh, well, I'm sure that you intend to catch me. I'm sure that you have the right heart about wanting to catch me. But I also know that scientifically, and when it comes to the laws of physics and gravity, that if I fall back, this may be a little bit problematic for you to catch me. This doesn't quite make sense. I don't know if I really trust it. Do we understand that God's promises for us are not a matter of logistics? It's not just a matter of what physically applies in this world. Do we really believe that God works that way? Because sometimes we'll read through the Bible and think, well, yeah, he did that, back with Moses, or he did that back with, Daniel, and he did that, even Jesus did this. But do we still believe that same God exists and he wants your faith to believe in him in that way? What are we worshiping? What are we singing to when we sing his praises here on Sunday? What exactly is it that we believe? Do we believe in God beyond the physical? Does my obedience to God match my faith in him? Are his words enough for me to trust and follow him? When he says, remove the stone. When he says, go out into deeper water. Even when we've been out in deep water for years. We've already been out there. We stayed all day. Are his words enough? When we read it in the Bible, is that enough? When he gives us instruction, is that enough? Or do we doubt? Do we actually have faith that says, I'm going to obey, and I understand that the increase in the depth of my faith are on the other side of me moving that stone? Imagine if they didn't move the stone. Imagine if they said, no, I don't want to, you know what, forget the stench. I don't want to see my brother like that. I don't even want to have to face it because it's already been too hard. It's already been too much grief. It's already been too much to bear for me to approach that. Faith is on the other side of the decision to do what God is asking you to do. There's a process here, right? That chair, I'm talking about standing in the chair. That's not what it was intended for. It was intended for me to sit down. Many of us are looking at faith thinking, well, if God just shows me what's on the other side, I'll do it. But that's not faith. Well, if God just proves it to me, he can't prove it. He can't prove it in that way because that does not result in faith. If we want to grow in our faith as a church, as individuals, we have to first be willing to follow him and do what he says. Does believe that you are the Messiah, believe that you're the Messiah, mean that you are willing to take away the stone from dead situations in your life? What have I given up on because I forgot about God's glory? I asked that question there at the very end. Forgetting about God's glory. See, sometimes, again, we can believe that God is capable of doing things if he had just shown up when we were ready, when we thought it was an appropriate time. But God's like, no. If I had shown up then, you would not have seen or been able to have faith and believe in my glory. If you show up while he's sick, yeah, we thought you could heal a sick person. But you know what, as they say, the haters would say? Haters would say, well, guess what? Doctors can heal sick people. They understand medicine. But can doctors bring somebody back from the dead after 4 days? Sometimes something has to remain hopeless and feel dead so that there can be no doubt. Sometimes you have to honestly see something that can only be fixed by God in order for your faith to be increased. God doesn't just walk around doing miraculous things just to amaze us all the time. Although it's amazing, it's done even when we see Jesus' miracles. Those things were done strategically to increase your faith. Do we actually believe that type of thing can exist for us? Or are we just resistant and, you know what? I'm not quite willing to go out in the deeper water. I'm not willing to remove that stone because I have my doubts. Forgetting that God wants to show you his glory. He wants you to be in the depths of despair financially. He wants you to be in this place, not because he wants to torture you or see you in pain, but so that you can know that he is God and he cares and he is working in your life. Are you willing to remove that stone? And finally, what can I do so that faith can become real in my life? What is the first step that God wants me to take in my journey of faith? Everybody's different in here. Everybody's got something else going on. We don't all match up in sync with everything. But for each person in here, God wants us to be faithful. He wants us to believe in him. What is the first step in doing that? For these ladies, for these people who were there, it was removing the stone. What is the phone call that you need to make? Who is the person you need to forgive? Where do you have to go? And what do you have to do so that you can see God's glory? So that your faith can increase? What step of obedience, what first step towards God do you have to make? What level of trust do you have to overcome in order to grow in your faith? Maybe you're a person who you don't have a relationship with God. You don't understand all the things. Maybe you need to take the first step of saying, I want to know him. I want to follow him. And if that's you, as a church, that's what we do. We are committed to helping you. We're going to stand up here in just a second. We're going to sing a song of invitation. Come forward and ask the church to help you. Allow us to study the Bible with you. Allow us to be able to instruct you and show you what it means to have a real relationship with God. Maybe you're a person who, like Mary and Martha, you've had so many hurts. Like Dave said, I've fallen so many times. I believe you can, God, but I'm afraid to just fall back and give it to you. Maybe your faith is in that place. If your faith is in that place, let us pray for you and pray with you as a church. Let us help build your faith. Let us help you remove the stone. It's not something you have to do by yourself, but the decision starts with you. What is the first step you need to make in increasing your faith? Where do you need to trust him? If you desire the prayers of the church, if you're in that place where you want to trust again, or maybe for the first time, please stand. Please come forward as we sing our song of invitation. Stand up for Jesus, ye soldiers.